The hammer struck the rotted floorboard with a sickening crunch, and Kathleen Sullivan's heart stopped. Beneath the splintered wood lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and secrets. But it wasn't the journal that made her blood run cold. It was the photograph tucked inside its cover. A photograph of her daughter Emma taken just yesterday with a message scrawled on the back in faded ink. She looks just like her. Protect the child. Kathleen's fingers trembled as she reached for the photograph. Emma's familiar face smiled back at her. Those same blue eyes, that same stubborn chin. But something was wrong. The ink on the back was aged decades old at least, yet the image was unmistakably her 15-year-old daughter in her favorite red hoodie, standing on the porch of this dilapidated hotel just yesterday evening. The impossible truth about room 6A was about to shatter everything Kathleen thought she knew about her new life. 42 years old with exactly $23.45 in her checking account wasn't where Kathleen had imagined herself at this stage in life. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago and Richard had managed to keep everything. The Colonial in Connecticut with its pristine lawn and designer kitchen. Both cars, including her beloved Audi. Even their joint investments that she'd foolishly never questioned, despite contributing her own salary from the marketing firm where she'd excelled before Emma was born. All she had left was her 15-year-old daughter, a beat-up Chevy with a mysterious rattling sound and a determination that burned brighter than her depleted bank balance. The online auction site looked sketchy at best, filled with foreclosed properties and abandoned lots that nobody wanted. She'd been scrolling through listings for hours, growing more desperate with each passing minute. Their current living situation, a cramped apartment above an auto repair shop, was supposed to be temporary. 3 months had stretched into what felt like 3 years, and the constant smell of motor oil was giving Emma headaches. But there it was, buried between a half-collapsed mobile home in West Virginia and a flood-damaged warehouse in Ohio. Historic Haunted Glen Hotel, $1 starting bid, no reserve. The black and white photograph showed a 3-story Victorian structure with elaborate gingerbread trim, its windows boarded up like closed eyes. Gothic revival architecture, with bay windows, ornate corbels, and a tower that stretched toward the sky like a finger pointing to heaven or hell. The description was sparse but intriguing. Built 1892, 24 rooms, needs extensive renovation. Sold as is, buyer responsible for all inspections and repairs. Property located in Mill Creek, PA. Original hardwood floors. Period fixtures. Commercial kitchen zoned for hospitality business. What caught Kathleen's attention wasn't the price or even the potential. It was the fine print at the bottom, written in italics as if the seller was reluctant to include it. Property comes with local folklore and rumored paranormal activity. Serious bidders only. No liability assumed for supernatural occurrences. Emma leaned over her shoulder, blue eyes narrowing at the laptop screen. Her daughter had inherited Richard's practical nature along with his piercing gaze, which meant she approached every one of Kathleen's increasingly desperate ideas with the enthusiasm of someone scheduling a root canal. At 15, Emma had already lived through her parents' bitter divorce, the loss of their family home, and the humiliation of having to change schools mid-semester when they could no longer afford private tuition. It's $1, Emma. $1 for an entire hotel. Emma's eyebrows arched with skepticism. And there's probably a reason for that. Look at this place. It looks like something out of a horror movie, like literally the kind of place where entire families get murdered in the first scene. Kathleen clicked through the few additional photos. The interior shots showed peeling wallpaper in patterns that had been fashionable during the Reagan administration. Water-stained ceilings with chunks of plaster missing and debris scattered across hardwood floors that had seen better decades. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that streamed through broken boards. Cobwebs draped the corners like ghostly decorations. And in one photo, what looked like a family of raccoons had taken up residence in what used to be the dining room. But underneath the decay, Kathleen could see the bones of something beautiful. Ornate crown molding that spoke of skilled craftsmen who took pride in their work. A sweeping staircase with an intricately carved banister that curved like a dancer's arm. Tall windows that would flood the rooms with natural light once the boards came down. Original hardwood floors that would gleam like honey once properly restored. Built-in bookcases and window seats that suggested a time when people valued permanence and beauty over convenience. I'm placing a bid, she announced, her cursor hovering over the button. Richard always said I lacked vision, but he was wrong. I can see what this place could become. Emma's voice carried the weight of someone forced to grow up too fast. Someone who'd learned to balance checkbooks and clip coupons while her friends worried about homework and TikTok trends. Mom, no. We can't afford to renovate a hotel. We can barely afford groceries. I'm 15 years old. I should be worrying about my chemistry test, not whether our new home is built on an ancient burial ground. Kathleen's finger hovered over the place bid button. Emma was right, of course. They were living on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, surviving on Kathleen's part-time job at a call center where she spent 8 hours a day getting yelled at by strangers about their internet bills. The smart thing would be to forget about the hotel and focus on finding a more stable situation. Maybe a small apartment they could actually afford. Maybe a second job that would give them enough breathing room to think beyond next week's rent. But Kathleen had been smart her entire marriage. Smart and careful and responsible, letting Richard make all the financial decisions while she raised Emma and maintained their picture-perfect home. She'd been smart when Richard suggested she quit her job to focus on being a full-time mother. Smart when he convinced her that his name alone should be on the investment accounts because it simplified the taxes. Smart when she signed papers she didn't fully understand because her husband was a successful corporate attorney and surely knew what was best for their family. Look where Smart had gotten her. She clicked the button. The confirmation page loaded showing her bid of $1. Current high bidder Kathleen Sullivan. Time remaining 2 days, 14 hours, 32 minutes. Emma crossed her arms across her chest, but there was something in her voice that might have been reluctant admiration. I can't believe you just did that. What if we actually win? What if we actually have to move to some ghost town in Pennsylvania and live in a haunted hotel? Kathleen closed the laptop with more confidence than she felt. Then we'll figure it out. We'll strip wallpaper and fix leaky pipes and turn it into something amazing. We'll run a bed and breakfast and serve fresh baked goods to travelers who want to experience small-town charm. Emma snorted. You can't even bake cookies without setting off the smoke alarm. I can learn, Kathleen said, the weight of her situation momentarily lifted by the wild possibility of a fresh start. We can learn together. Think about it, Em. Our own business, a real home with enough space to breathe. No more listening to engines revving at 600 in the morning or smelling motor oil every time we open our front door. For 2 days, Kathleen obsessively checked the auction page. No other bidders appeared. She researched Mill Creek, Pennsylvania, finding a town website that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2003, and a handful of Google Street View images showing empty storefronts and overgrown lots. The town's Wikipedia page was 3 paragraphs long and mentioned a population decline of 60% since 1950. On the final day, with 30 minutes left in the auction, Kathleen's phone rang. Mrs. Sullivan, this is Frank Morgan from Morgan Real Estate in Mill Creek. I'm calling about the Haunted Glen Hotel auction. Kathleen's heart skipped. Yes, I wanted to make sure you understand what you're bidding on. This isn't exactly a turnkey operation. The building has been empty for over 30 years. There's no heat, no running water, and the electrical system is older than my grandfather. The roof leaks, the foundation has settling issues, and honestly, the whole structure might not be up to code. Are you trying to talk me out of buying it? The line went silent for a moment. Ma'am, I've been selling real estate in this town for 40 years. I've seen people come in with big dreams and bigger wallets thinking they could resurrect the haunted Glen. None of them lasted 6 months. The place has a way of discouraging renovation efforts. What do you mean? Another pause longer this time. Tools go missing, electrical problems that shouldn't exist. Workers quit for no reason. And then there are the stories. What stories, look? Mrs. Sullivan, I'm probably not supposed to tell you this, but the place has a reputation. Has ever since the original owner and his family died there back in 1892. Some folks say they never really left. 3 days later, she won the auction. No one else had even bothered to bid. The drive from Connecticut to Mill Creek took 6 hours through increasingly sparse countryside. What started as suburban sprawl gradually gave way to farmland, then to forests interrupted by the occasional gas station or roadside diner. Emma had packed her entire life into 2 duffel bags and spent most of the trip staring out the window with the resigned expression of someone heading to their execution. I've been thinking, she said as they passed a sign advertising fresh peaches 15 miles ahead, even though it was October and peach season was long over. Maybe this is some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe Dad paid someone to put up a fake auction just to mess with you. Kathleen had considered the same possibility. Richard was vindictive enough to engineer something that cruel and certainly wealthy enough to afford it. The money transfer went through. The deed is in my name. If it's a prank, it's an expensive one. Or maybe it's some kind of money laundering scheme. Maybe we're about to become unwitting accomplices in organized crime. Emma, you watch too much TV. Or maybe it's a cult. Maybe the entire town is part of some weird religious sect, and they lure in unsuspecting single mothers with fake real estate deals. Mill Creek, Pennsylvania population 823, according to the welcome sign, looked like a town that time had not just forgotten, but actively avoided. Main Street stretched for exactly 4 blocks, lined with more empty storefronts than occupied ones. Faded signs advertised businesses that had clearly been closed for years: Mill Creek 5 and Dime, Harrison's Barber Shop, First Bank of Mill Creek. The few businesses that remained, a diner called Ruby's, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a combination gas station and post office, had the weathered look of survivors hanging on by pure stubbornness. The residential streets branching off Main revealed a mix of well-maintained older homes and abandoned properties with overgrown yards and boarded windows. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where a stranger's arrival would be noted and discussed over coffee the next morning. The haunted Glen Hotel sat at the end of Main Street like a dowager queen fallen on hard times. Up close, it was even more imposing than in the photographs. 3 stories of Victorian architecture with a wraparound porch that sagged in places but still maintained an air of faded dignity. The building's footprint was larger than Kathleen had expected, stretching back from the street in an L shape that had suggested multiple additions over the years. A circular tower anchored one corner, its windows dark and mysterious. The boarded windows gave it a blind, expectant look, as if it were waiting for something to happen. "This is insane," Emma muttered, hauling her duffel bag out of the car. "We're going to die here, either from tetanus or serial killers or whatever ghosts are supposedly floating around inside." Kathleen pulled her own bag from the trunk, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The drive had given her plenty of time to question her decision, especially when they'd passed through town after town that looked just as abandoned as Mill Creek. But they were here now, and she was out of alternatives. Their lease on the apartment was up in 2 weeks, and she didn't have enough money for a security deposit on a new place. "It's going to be an adventure," she said, fishing the keys from her purse. The realtor, Frank Morgan, had met them at his office, a cramped space above the hardware store that smelled like coffee and cigarettes, and handed over 2 sets of keys with a look that suggested he thought she was making a terrible mistake. He'd also given her a business card for a local contractor, the number for the power company, and a warning that the electrical system hadn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration. "Adventures are what happen to other people," Emma replied. "What happens to us is called poor life choices." The front door was solid oak, painted red but faded to the color of dried blood. The brass doorknob was tarnished green, and the beveled glass panels on either side were covered with grime that turned the afternoon sunlight murky. The key turned easily, surprisingly easily, as if the lock had been recently maintained. And the door swung open with a horror movie creak that made Emma step back. "Nope, no way. I'll sleep in the car." Kathleen stepped inside, and despite everything, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight, the musty smell of disuse mixed with something that might have been old perfume, the way her footsteps echoed in the empty space, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The lobby was magnificent, even under layers of neglect. A crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling decorated with ornate plasterwork, its crystals dim with dust but still catching the light. The front desk was mahogany carved with elaborate scrollwork that spoke of an era when craftsmanship mattered more than efficiency. Behind the desk, a wall of pigeonholes for room keys and mail stretched to the ceiling, each cubby labeled with a brass number. A wide staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, its banister worn smooth by countless hands. The newel post was topped with a carved pineapple, a symbol of hospitality. "Okay," Emma admitted grudgingly, following her inside and setting down her bag. "I can maybe see why someone would want to fix this place up. Maybe." if they had about $1 million in a construction crew and several years to burn. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring their new home. The first floor contained the lobby, a dining room with a stone fireplace, large enough to roast a pig, a commercial kitchen that would need to be completely gutted and brought up to health code standards, and a small office behind the front desk. Glass-fronted cabinets displayed china that had somehow survived decades of abandonment, and a player piano sat silent in one corner, its ivory keys yellowed with age. The second and third floors were divided into guest rooms, each one telling a story of faded grandeur. Most contained nothing but dust and the occasional piece of furniture too heavy to steal. Iron bed frames, marble-topped washstands, wardrobes that looked like they could hide entire families. The rooms were numbered with brass plates, 1A, 1B, 1C, continuing in sequence up to the third floor. It was on the third floor that Kathleen first noticed something odd. The rooms were numbered in sequence, 1A through 5B, on the first section of the hallway, then suddenly jumping to 7A. She stood in the hallway counting doors and checking numbers twice. "That's weird," she said, standing between rooms 5B and 7A. "There should be another room here." Emma consulted the floor plan they'd found in the office, a hand-drawn blueprint yellowed with age. "According to this, there are 12 rooms on each floor, but I only count 11 up here." Kathleen ran her hands along the wall where 6A should have been. The wallpaper was different here, newer than the rest, with a pattern of roses that clashed with the geometric design covering the other walls. It was also slightly buckled, as if someone had applied it over an uneven surface. She pressed against it and felt the wall give slightly, as if there was empty space behind it. "There's something behind here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or someone," Emma replied, wrapping her arms around herself. "Can we please not investigate the creepy, hidden room on our first day? I'd like to at least unpack and maybe find some furniture before we get murdered by whatever Victorian serial killer is walled up in there." That night, they made camp in room 2A, the most habitable space they'd found. It contained an actual bed, a four-poster with a sagging mattress but a solid frame, and a dresser with a mirror that only had a few cracks. Kathleen had managed to get the electricity working after locating the main breaker box in the basement, though the ancient wiring made the lights flicker ominously whenever the wind picked up. They ate gas station sandwiches and chips by the light of the single working lamp and tried to ignore the way the old building settled around them, creaking and sighing like something alive. "Tell me again why we couldn't just rent a normal apartment," Emma said, curled up in her sleeping bag on top of the dubious mattress. She'd insisted on keeping her clothes on, claiming she didn't trust the cleanliness of anything in the hotel. "Because normal apartments cost more than $23 a month," Kathleen replied from her makeshift bed on the floor. She'd found some relatively clean linens in a closet and created a nest of blankets that would have to suffice until they could afford proper furniture. "And because this could be something special. Imagine it, Em. Our own business, a real home. We could make this work." Emma was quiet for a moment, and Kathleen could hear her shifting in the darkness. Then, "Do you really think it's haunted?" Kathleen considered the question. She'd never been particularly superstitious. Richard had mocked her mother's belief in psychics and fortune-tellers, and Kathleen had gradually adopted his skeptical worldview. But there was something about the hotel that felt aware, as if it were listening to their conversation, evaluating these new occupants who dared to disturb its decades of solitude. The building sounds were different from any place she'd ever lived. In their old house, the settling noises had been familiar, predictable. Here, every creak and groan seemed deliberate, almost conversational. Footsteps echoed from empty rooms above them. Doors that she was certain she'd left open were found closed the next morning. And twice she could have sworn she heard music, faint piano melodies that seemed to drift through the walls like smoke. "I think old buildings have memories," she said finally. "And maybe this one has more memories than most." They were both quiet after that, listening to the sounds of the hotel around them. Somewhere in the walls, pipes gurgled and settled. Floorboards creaked in empty rooms, following patterns that sounded almost like footsteps. Wind whistled through gaps in the boarded windows, creating a low moaning that might have been the building's voice. And once, just as Kathleen was drifting off to sleep, she could have sworn she heard a child laughing somewhere in the distance, followed by a woman's voice saying, "Charlotte, come back inside now." The next morning brought instant coffee made with bottled water and a visit from their first local. Kathleen was prying boards off the front windows, a task that required more upper body strength than she possessed, but which felt symbolically important when a pickup truck pulled up to the curb. The man who climbed out was somewhere in his 60s, with calloused hands, work boots that had seen decades of service, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of a lifetime spent outdoors. "You must be the new owner," he said, extending a hand that engulfed Kathleen's in a firm grip. "Robert Mackenzie. Everyone calls me Mac. I run the hardware store down the street. Figured I'd stop by and see if you needed anything." Kathleen's relief at meeting a friendly face was immediate. "Kathleen Sullivan, this is my daughter Emma." She gestured toward Emma, who was dragging debris out to the growing pile on the front lawn. Her daughter had surprised her by diving into the work with determination, perhaps realizing that complaining wouldn't change their situation. Mac nodded at Emma, who paused in her debris hauling to wave. "Brave of you to take this place on. Haven't seen anyone try to fix her up in, oh, must be 20 years now. Maybe longer." 20 years, Kathleen paused in her window-clearing efforts, the crowbar heavy in her hands. "Has it been empty that long?" "Longer than that, really. Old Mrs. Sinclair was the last owner who actually tried to do something with it. She inherited it from her family, must have been back in the early 80s. Tried to run it as a bed and breakfast for a while, but—" Mac trailed off, glancing up at the third-floor windows with an expression Kathleen couldn't quite read. "Well, she had some problems. Guests wouldn't stay the night, complained about noises and such. Cold spots in rooms where the heating worked, fine doors that locked themselves, that kind of thing." Emma appeared at Kathleen's elbow, suddenly interested in the conversation. She was covered in dust and cobwebs, but looked more alive than she had in months. "What kind of noises?" Max shifted uncomfortably, removing his baseball cap to scratch his graying hair. "Look, I don't put much stock in ghost stories, but this place has always had a reputation. Goes back to when it was first built. The original owner, Jonathan Blackwood, he had some troubles toward the end." "What kind of troubles?" Kathleen asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "The kind that ended with him hanging himself in room 6A, Max said bluntly, along with his wife and daughter. Whole family gone in one night. Murder-suicide, according to the official report. No one ever figured out why. Jonathan was well respected in town. Successful businessman. His wife Elizabeth was involved in all the church activities. Little Charlotte was just 7 years old, sweet as pie. Then one morning they were all found dead." Kathleen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning. "Room 6A. But there is no room 6A. We looked." Mac's expression grew grim. "There used to be. Mrs. Sinclair had it sealed up after some guests reported disturbances. Figured if no one could get in, whatever was in there couldn't get out. Can't say I blamed her. I helped with the construction work myself back in '87. We built a false wall right over the door. Papered it to match the rest of the hallway. You'd never know there was a room behind there unless someone told you. But why seal it up instead of just, I don't know, redecorating it or something?" Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying the hotel's facade. "Because some of the guests who stayed in that room, well, they came downstairs in the morning talking about things that couldn't have happened. Conversations with people who weren't there. A little girl playing in the corner. A woman crying in the bathroom. And the smell. What smell? Laudanum. Old-fashioned medicine. Smelled sweet and sickly. Guests said it was strongest in room 6A. Even though Mrs. Sinclair had the room cleaned professionally, had the carpets shampooed, even repainted the walls, nothing helped. So she sealed it up. After Mac left, promising to help with supplies and offering the name of a reliable electrician, though good luck getting him to work on the third floor, he'd added with a meaningful look, Kathleen and Emma stood staring up at the section of wall that hid room 6A. "We're going to open it, aren't we?" Emma said. It wasn't really a question. "We have to. If we're going to run a successful business, we need every room. 24 rooms is barely enough to make this place profitable. We can't afford to lose one. And if we're going to run a successful business, we probably shouldn't have guests being terrorized by whatever Mrs. Sinclair was trying to keep locked up." Kathleen couldn't argue with that logic. They spent the morning gathering tools. A sledgehammer from Mac's store, he'd insisted on the heavy-duty model, just in case, crowbars, work gloves, and a powerful flashlight with extra batteries. Mac had also thrown in some dust masks and a first aid kit, because you never know what you're going to find behind a wall that's been sealed for 30 years. By afternoon, they were back on the third floor, standing in front of the wall that hid room 6A. Up close, Kathleen could see how the newer wallpaper didn't quite match the existing pattern. The adhesive had started to fail in places, creating bubbles and wrinkles that made the wall look diseased. Last chance to back out, Emma said, but she was already pulling on her work gloves. We could just pretend this room doesn't exist. Tell guests it's storage or something. Kathleen raised the sledgehammer, surprised by its weight. Together. The first blow sent cracked spiderwebbing across the newer wallpaper, revealing older paper underneath and beneath that what looked like bare plaster. The second punch broke through, entirely revealing darkness beyond and releasing a rush of stale air that carried with it the smell Mac had mentioned, sweet and cloying and medicinal, like cough syrup mixed with flowers. As they widened the hole, more of that strange air emerged, along with something else. The sound of settling, as if the room beyond was adjusting to contact with the outside world after decades of isolation. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light that streamed through the opening, and Kathleen could see the edge of a carpet and what looked like the corner of a piece of furniture. They shined the flashlight through the opening. The beam illuminated a room frozen in time, preserved like an exhibit in a museum. Unlike the rest of the hotel room, A still contained all its original furniture: a bed with a carved wooden headboard, a dresser with an oval mirror, two chairs positioned by the window, a small writing desk. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but nothing had been disturbed. It was as if the room had been waiting, patient and still, for someone to find it. "It's like a tomb," Emma whispered. They climbed through the hole, their footsteps muffled by a carpet that had once been burgundy but had faded to the color of dried roses. The air inside was still and heavy, carrying that sweet medicinal smell that seemed to coat the inside of Kathleen's throat. The room was smaller than the others, with a single window that faced the back of the building. Unlike the other windows, this one wasn't boarded up, and pale sunlight filtered through glass that was somehow still clean, despite 3 decades of isolation. Kathleen approached the dresser, her flashlight beam dancing across the mirror's surface. The glass was old, the kind with a slight wave that distorted reflections, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw movement in its depths, a flash of dark hair, a pale dress. But when she looked directly at it, she saw only her own face staring back, wide-eyed and dirt-streaked. Then she noticed the writing on the mirror's surface, not etched into the glass, but written in what looked like soap or chalk, though the words were still clearly visible after all these years. "She knows. She's always known. Protect the child." "Okay, that's definitely not creepy at all," Emma said, but her voice was shaky. "Who's she and what child?" Kathleen moved to the bed where something white caught her eye. Tucked between the mattress and headboard was an envelope yellowed with age and brittle to the touch. Her hands trembled as she opened it, the paper threatening to crumble at her touch. Inside was a letter written in faded brown ink, probably originally black, but aged to the color of dried blood. "My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. Caroline has discovered the truth about what we've been hiding, and I fear what she might do to protect her secret. The child must not suffer for the sins of her parents. Look for the other letters. I've hidden them throughout the hotel. The truth must be preserved even if we cannot be. All my love. Jonathan Blackwood." Kathleen breathed. The original owner. Emma was exploring the rest of the room, her own flashlight beam probing the corners and crevices. "Mom, there's something else here behind the bed." Kathleen joined her daughter, and together they moved the heavy bed frame. Underneath, carved into the wooden floor with what must have been a knife or chisel, were more words. "The child is innocent. Caroline Sinclair knows. Find the truth in the walls." Caroline Sinclair, Emma said slowly. "Wasn't that the name Mac mentioned? The last owner who sealed up this room?" Kathleen felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, though she couldn't yet see the full picture. "He mentioned Mrs. Sinclair, but this says Caroline Sinclair knew something back when the Blackwoods died in 1892. That would make her the ancestor of the woman who sealed up this room. The ancestor, or maybe even the grandmother," Emma finished. "Mom, what if the Sinclairs didn't just inherit this hotel? What if they've been connected to it all along? What if they're the reason the Blackwood family died?" They spent the rest of the day searching room 6A for more clues. In the dresser drawers, they found more letters, all from Jonathan to Elizabeth, presumably his wife. The letters painted a picture of a man growing increasingly paranoid and frightened, convinced that someone named Caroline was planning to harm his family to protect a terrible secret. The writing desk contained a leather journal, its pages filled with financial records in Jonathan's careful handwriting, receipts for hotel supplies, payroll for staff income from guests. But mixed in with the legitimate business records were other entries, notes about missing money and altered books. Someone had been embezzling from the hotel, and Jonathan had been tracking it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the room's single window, Kathleen made a decision that would change everything. "We're going to find those other letters," she announced. Jonathan said he hid them throughout the hotel. "There's more to this story, and if we're going to live here, we need to know what really happened." Emma nodded, though Kathleen could see the fear in her daughter's eyes mixing with something else. Curiosity, maybe even excitement. For the first time since the divorce, they had a mystery to solve together. A purpose that went beyond simple survival. "Where do we start? The walls?" Kathleen said, remembering the final message carved into the floor. He said to find the truth in the walls. The next 3 days passed in a blur of destruction and discovery. Kathleen and Emma systematically began removing wallpaper from the guest rooms, starting with the second floor. It was tedious work. The old adhesive had hardened over the decades, and the paper came off in small pieces that had to be scraped away with putty knives. But behind the first layer of paper in room 2C, they found their first clue. Another letter from Jonathan, this one detailing his suspicions that Caroline Sinclair was embezzling money from the town's founding fund money that had been entrusted to the Blackwood family for safekeeping. The letter was longer than the first, written in the same careful handwriting, but with increasing urgencies. "Margaret, I have confirmed my suspicions about Caroline Sinclair. She has been systematically stealing from the municipal funds that the town council entrusted to our care. The missing amounts total nearly 3,000, a fortune that could ruin not only our family, but the entire town if it cannot be recovered. I confronted her today at the bank, thinking she might have an explanation, some misunderstanding that could be resolved quietly. Instead, she became angry, defensive. She accused me of being careless with the books, suggested that perhaps I was the one who had misplaced the money. When I showed her the evidence I had compiled, her demeanor changed entirely. There was something in her eyes, Margaret, something cold and calculating that frightened me. She asked about Charlotte, whether she had been asking questions about the hotel's business, whether she had seen the ledgers in my office. Why would she ask about our daughter? Charlotte is only 7 years old. What could she possibly know about financial matters? I fear Caroline may try to implicate our family in her theft. We must be careful. Trust no one until we can present our evidence to the proper authorities." Jonathan, in room 2F, hidden behind a loose baseboard, they discovered a small leather journal filled with financial records. The handwriting was different from Jonathan's, more precise, feminine, with flourishes on the capital letters. It was signed E.B., Elizabeth Blackwood, Jonathan's wife. Elizabeth's journal revealed a systematic pattern of theft spanning several years. Carolyn Sinclair, who served as the town's treasurer in addition to running her own boarding house, had been skimming money from various municipal funds and covering her tracks by manipulating the records. The Blackwoods, as prominent citizens and managers of the largest hotel in town, had been entrusted with safeguarding some of these funds. When discrepancies began to appear, Jonathan had started his own investigation. "Look at this entry," Emma said, reading over her mother's shoulder. "It's dated just 2 days before they died. Elizabeth writes, Caroline came to see Jonathan today. She knows we've discovered her theft. She threatened little Charlotte, said that accidents happen to children who know too much. We've decided to confront the town council tomorrow, but I fear what she might do to stop us. I have hidden copies of all the evidence throughout the hotel. If something happens to us, perhaps someone will find the truth." Kathleen felt a chill run down her spine. Little Charlotte must have been their daughter. And if Caroline was threatening her, then maybe the Blackwood family didn't commit suicide, Emma finished. Maybe they were murdered. The discovery of additional evidence came quickly after that. In room 3A, they found bank statements hidden inside the frame of a landscape painting. In room 3C, a loose floorboard concealed more correspondence between Jonathan and various town officials. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Caroline Sinclair's crimes and the Blackwood family's attempts to expose her. But it was in room 1B, in a hiding place so clever they almost missed it, that they found the most damning evidence yet. Emma noticed that one of the fireplace bricks was slightly darker than the others, as if it had been removed and replaced. When they pried it loose, they found a metal tin containing photographs, receipts, and a detailed timeline of Caroline's embezzlement activities. The photographs were particularly revealing. Pictures of Caroline meeting with men Kathleen didn't recognize, apparently conducting business transactions. On the back of each photo, someone had written dates and amounts. CS 200 March 15, 1892. CS 150 April 3, 1892. The handwriting matched Jonathan's journal entries. That evening, as they sat in the lobby sharing a dinner of takeout from the town's only restaurant, a place called Ruby's Diner, that served surprisingly good meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Kathleen found herself studying the hotel's layout with new eyes. If Carolyn Sinclair had killed the Blackwood family to protect her secret, she would have needed to make it look like a murderer's suicide. But how had she managed it? And more importantly, how had she gotten away with it for so long? The answer came from an unexpected source. As they were getting ready for bed, Emma noticed something odd about the baseboards in their room. "Mom, look at this. The wood is different here, like someone replaced this section." Kathleen knelt beside her daughter, running her hands along the baseboard. Emma was right. The wood grain was different, and the stain didn't quite match. When she pressed against it, the section shifted slightly. "It's loose," she said, working her fingers under the edge. The baseboard came away easily, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside was a small metal box, tarnished with age and locked with a tiny padlock that had rusted through decades ago. Inside the box, wrapped in oiled cloth that had somehow survived the years, was the final piece of the puzzle, a confession letter written in Caroline Sinclair's own hand. "To whoever finds this, I never intended for it to go so far. The money was meant to be a loan. I was going to pay it back once my husband's business improved. We had invested everything in the new mill, and when the contract fell through, we faced ruin. I saw an opportunity with the municipal funds, money that wouldn't be audited for months. I convinced myself it was temporary, but Jonathan discovered the missing funds. And when I tried to explain, he threatened to expose me to the entire town. He had documentation, photographs, witnesses. My family's reputation, our standing in the community, it would have been destroyed. My children would have grown up as the offspring of a thief." I went to the hotel that night, October 13, 1892, intending to reason with them one more time. I brought laudanum, a large bottle of it that I had purchased for my own sleeplessness. I thought that if I could just make them sleep long enough, I could take the evidence and leave town, start over somewhere else. But Jonathan woke up while I was searching his office. We struggled. I never meant to hurt him, but he fell and struck his head on the corner of his desk. There was so much blood. He tried to call for Elizabeth, but his voice was weak. I gave him the laudanum to quiet him, more than I should have. He stopped breathing within minutes. Elizabeth heard the commotion and came downstairs in her nightgown. When she saw Jonathan's body, she screamed. I couldn't let her alert the neighbors, so I gave her the laudanum as well. Too much of it. She never woke up. Little Charlotte found us in the morning. She was so small, so innocent, standing in the doorway in her white nightgown with her hair in braids. She asked where her mama and papa were, why they wouldn't wake up. I told her they were sleeping, that she should sleep too. I gave her just a small amount of the laudanum in a cup of milk. She trusted me. Children that age trust adults completely. The laudanum worked quickly on one so young. She simply lay down on her parents' bed and closed her eyes. I arranged the scene to look like Jonathan had poisoned his family before hanging himself. I forged a suicide note explaining financial difficulties and despair over debts. I tied the rope myself and lifted his body. No one questioned it. The Blackwoods had been struggling with the hotel's finances, and people assumed the stress had driven Jonathan to madness. I returned the stolen money gradually over the following months, making it appear as if I had found errors in the town's bookkeeping that had resulted in temporary discrepancies. My reputation remained intact. My family prospered. I even attended the Blackwoods' funeral and wept with the rest of the town for the tragic loss. But I have never slept peacefully since that night, and I know I never will. I see little Charlotte's face in my dreams, asking why her mama and papa won't wake up. I smell the laudanum on my hands no matter how many times I wash them. I hear Elizabeth's screams echoing through my house at night. The truth dies with me, but perhaps someday someone will find this confession and give the Blackwood family the justice they deserved. They were innocent of any wrongdoing. The only crime committed in this hotel was mine. May God forgive me, Carolyn Sinclair. October 15, 1932. Kathleen and Emma sat in stunned silence after reading the letter. Outside their window, the wind had picked up, causing the old hotel to creak and settle around them in a symphony of groans and whispers. The single lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for a moment, Kathleen could have sworn she saw faces in those shadows. A man with kind eyes, woman in a nightgown, a little girl with braids. She murdered an entire family, Emma whispered. A whole family, including a 7-year-old child, and got away with it for her entire life. But she didn't get away with it, Kathleen said thoughtfully, looking around the room with new understanding. Look at what happened to this place afterward. It never prospered, never succeeded as a business. Every owner who tried to run it failed. It's like the hotel itself was holding on to the secret, waiting for someone to find the truth. As if in response to her words, they heard a sound from somewhere above them. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking across the floor of the third story. But these weren't the random creaks and settling noises they'd grown accustomed to. These were purposeful, measured steps that started at one end of the hallway and moved steadily toward the other end. Emma grabbed Kathleen's arm, her fingers digging into her mother's skin. Please tell me you hear that too. Kathleen nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The footsteps continued moving from one end of the hallway to the other, then stopping directly above their room. For a long moment, there was silence. Then so faint they might have imagined it came the sound of a child's laughter, bright and innocent and completely incongruous with the darkness outside. Then silence again. They sat frozen for several minutes waiting for the sounds to resume. When they didn't, Emma finally found her voice. Do you think it's them, the Blackwood family? Kathleen considered the question. A week ago, she would have dismissed such an idea as nonsense born of stress and suggestion. But after everything they'd discovered, after feeling the hotel's strange awareness, since the moment they'd arrived, she found herself believing in possibilities she'd never entertained before. I think she said carefully that some wrongs can't be put right until the truth is known. And maybe they've been waiting all this time for someone to find Caroline's confession. But what do we do with it? Who do we tell? Before Kathleen could answer, they heard a soft knock at their door. Both women froze. It was nearly midnight, and they were the only people in the building. The nearest neighbor was 3 blocks away, and no one in town knew them well enough to visit at this hour. The knock came again, patient and polite. Kathleen stood slowly, her legs unsteady. Who's there? No answer, but the doorknob began to turn. Emma scrambled backward on the bed, clutching the confession letter to her chest. Mom? The door was locked. I know it was locked. The door opened slowly, revealing the darkened hallway beyond. No one was there, but as they watched, a piece of paper slid across the floor, stopping just inside their room. Kathleen approached it cautiously, as if it might be dangerous. It was a hotel registration card, the old-fashioned kind with ornate lettering. In faded ink, someone had written Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Blackwood and daughter Charlotte, room 6A, October 13, 1892. And then in a different hand, Present, please give our regards to William Sinclair. William Sinclair, Emma said. Must be another relative. Kathleen turned the card over. On the back, in the same faded handwriting, was an address in Mill Creek and a phone number. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. As if their discovery of the confession had sent some kind of signal into the world, Kathleen was in the kitchen, trying to figure out how to restore the ancient plumbing without electrocuting herself when she heard voices in the lobby. She emerged to find Emma talking to an elderly man in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture military straight despite his age. Mom, this is Mr. William Sinclair. He's the president of First Bank of Mill Creek. Kathleen felt her blood pressure spike. A descendant of the woman who had murdered the Blackwood family was standing in their lobby, and Kathleen had no idea what his intentions might be. Miss Sullivan, the man smiled, his teeth too white and perfect to be real. I understand you've purchased our historic hotel. I must say it's refreshing to see someone taking an interest in Mill Creek's architectural heritage. However, I think you may be in over your head with this project. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone used to getting what he wanted. Kathleen recognized the type immediately. She'd spent 15 years married to one. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Sinclair, but we're managing just fine. His smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. I'm sure you believe that now, but the reality of restoring a building of this age is daunting. The costs alone would be prohibitive for most people. I'd be willing to take it off your hands, say $50,000. That's a considerable profit on your $1 investment. Emma stepped closer to her mother, the confession letter hidden safely under her mattress upstairs. "We're not interested in selling Mr. Sinclair." The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I understand you've been doing some renovations. Opening up sealed rooms, disturbing areas that have been closed off for decades. That can be dangerous in a building this old. Structural issues, asbestos, all manner of hazards. A single mother and her teenage daughter working without proper permits or inspections. The town council might take issue with that." The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Kathleen felt a flare of anger she hadn't experienced since the divorce. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Sinclair?" "Not at all, Ms. Sullivan. Just expressing concern for your welfare. This town has a history of unfortunate accidents befalling businesses that don't thrive. Electrical fires, structural collapses. It would be a shame to see history repeat itself." He placed his business card on the front desk, the same address that had been written on the back of the mysterious registration card. "My offer stands should you reconsider. Mill Creek is a small town, Ms. Sullivan. We value our heritage, our reputations. Some secrets are best left buried, for everyone's sake." As William Sinclair turned to leave, Kathleen saw a flicker of movement at the top of the stairs, a small figure in a white dress that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Sinclair must have seen it too. He froze, his face suddenly pale, before hurrying out the door without another word. Emma's voice was barely audible in the silence that followed. "I think we just met the enemy, Mom." Kathleen picked up Sinclair's business card, turning it over in her fingers. "And I think the Blackwood family just chose sides." Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the eaves of the haunted Glen Hotel, carrying with it the echo of a child's laughter and the promise of long-delayed justice. William Sinclair's veiled threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even after his Cadillac disappeared down Main Street, Kathleen felt the weight of his words pressing down on her shoulders. The hotel seemed to respond to the confrontation, creaking and settling around them with renewed urgency, as if warning them of dangers to come. Mac arrived an hour later with his truck loaded with salvaged lumber, his weathered face clouding, when Kathleen mentioned William's visit. "Can't say I'm surprised. The Sinclairs have owned this town since before I was born. William's grandfather built half the businesses on Main Street after the Depression. His father was mayor for 20 years, and now William runs the bank, chairs the town council, and owns enough property to make a real estate developer blush." Emma sprawled on the lobby's dusty floor, sketching room layouts for their ongoing investigation. "So he's basically the town villain." Mac's laugh carried no humor, just decades of resignation. "More like royalty. Around here, the Sinclair name opens doors, gets permits approved overnight that might take others months, makes parking tickets disappear." Kathleen studied the business card William had left behind. The paper was thick, expensive, with gold embossing that caught the morning light. For a family built on stolen money, they certainly didn't hesitate to flaunt their wealth. And now we're threatening their precious reputation. "Truth is a funny thing in small towns," Mac replied, examining the ancient wiring in the lobby chandelier. "It has a way of bending to fit whatever story the powerful people need it to tell. Folks around here have heard whispers about the Blackwoods for generations, but nobody's ever had proof." Until now, Emma added, her eyes bright with the righteousness that only a teenager could muster. "We have Caroline's confession. We have the financial records. We have actual evidence." The chandelier flickered to life under Mac's careful touch, casting prism rainbows across the faded wallpaper. "Evidence is only useful if people are willing to see it. And in Mill Creek, people have been looking away from the Sinclair family's sins for over 100 years. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mac's hand instinctively moved toward his pocket, as if reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Old habits from his military days, perhaps. The woman on their doorstep was in her 70s, silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her tailored blazer and pearls speaking of old money and careful breeding. Margaret Sinclair, William's aunt. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same aristocratic nose, the same calculating eyes. But where William's face held only cold ambition, Margaret showed something else. Regret, perhaps, or fear. "I believe you've been looking for me," she announced, holding up the registration card they'd found the previous night. Her fingers trembled slightly, belying her composed exterior. "May I come in? What I have to tell you shouldn't be overheard." In the lobby, Margaret surveyed the beginnings of their restoration work with a practiced eye, nodding approvingly at the newly functioning chandelier. I was 14 when my grandmother sealed up room 6A. I remember standing in the hallway watching the workers build that false wall. She told everyone it was because of structural issues, but I knew better. There were nights I'd hear her pacing the halls, talking to herself, apologizing to people who weren't there. Emma perched on the edge of the front desk, her skepticism evident in every line of her body. So you knew all along that your great-grandmother murdered the Blackwoods. Margaret's composure cracked slightly, her aristocratic facade giving way to something more human, more vulnerable. Not at first, but I found things over the years. Letters, journal entries, nightmares that felt more like memories that didn't belong to me. This hotel has a way of revealing its secrets to those who are meant to find them. Kathleen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty lobby, like how we found Caroline's confession. Margaret nodded, retrieving an envelope from her handbag. I've been waiting for someone like you, someone who would listen to what the hotel was trying to tell them. Here, these belong to my grandmother. Inside the envelope were photographs, formal portraits from the late 1800s, stiff poses and solemn faces gazing out from the sepia-tinted past. The first showed a family, a tall man with kind eyes and a neat beard, a woman in a high-necked dress with hair piled atop her head, and between them a little girl with dark curls and a serious expression. The Blackwood family, Margaret explained. Jonathan, Elizabeth, and Charlotte. Taken 6 months before they died. But it was the second photograph that made Kathleen's blood run cold. A modern snapshot of Emma taken just weeks ago when they'd visited a college campus in Connecticut. Emma's face smiling back at them, almost identical to the solemn little girl in the century-old portrait. How did you get this? Kathleen demanded, protective instincts flaring. Emma's Facebook profile. It's public, dear. When I saw it, I nearly dropped my tea. It was like seeing Charlotte Blackwood brought back to life. Emma grabbed the photographs, holding them side by side. The resemblance was uncanny. The same heart-shaped face, the same eyebrows, arched in perpetual curiosity, the same slight asymmetry to their smiles. This is impossible. We're not related to the Blackwoods. Are we? Mom? Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. What do you know about your family history, Miss Sullivan? About your mother's mother? Kathleen struggled to process the implication. My grandmother was Mary Morrison. She died when I was young, but I remember her stories about growing up in Pennsylvania. She always said her parents died when she was a baby, that she was raised by her aunt. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Mary Morrison, not Mary Blackwood. Margaret nodded, triumph and sadness mingling in her expression. The Blackwoods had 2 daughters. Charlotte was 7 when she died, but baby Sarah, just 6 months old, was staying with Elizabeth's sister that night because she'd been colicky. When news of the suicide spread, the sister took Sarah and fled town immediately. She was afraid, Kathleen whispered, the pieces falling into place. Afraid that whoever killed the Blackwoods would come for the baby next. Margaret removed another document from her bag, handling it with reverence. A birth certificate yellowed with age. Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood, born March 12, 1892. The paper trembled in Kathleen's hands, history rewriting itself before her eyes. Sarah was renamed Mary Morrison by her adoptive family. Margaret continued, she grew up never knowing the truth about what happened to her birth parents, never knowing that her sister and parents were murdered to protect a family secret. Emma's face had gone pale, her voice barely audible. So Mom is the great-granddaughter of the murder victims, and I'm the great-great-granddaughter, the spitting image of Charlotte. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I've spent decades trying to make amends for what my ancestor did. I've donated most of the family money to historical preservation and scholarships. I tried to research what happened to the surviving Blackwood child to see if they had any relatives who deserve restitution, but I could never find proof of what Caroline had done. Until now, the hotel creaked around them as if responding to the revelations. A gust of wind swept through the lobby, though the doors and windows were closed. The chandelier swayed slightly, its crystals tinkling like distant laughter. This hotel has been waiting for you, Margaret said simply. The Blackwoods never left this place. They've been protecting it, keeping it from being truly successful under anyone else's ownership, waiting for their family to return. As if to confirm her words, the player piano in the corner suddenly came to life, keys depressing of their own accord, picking out a soft, haunting melody that seemed to speak of loss and longing and finally hope. No one was sitting at the piano bench. No electricity connected to the ancient instrument, yet the music filled the lobby, beautiful and impossible. "They're not angry," Margaret said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're grateful. After all these years, someone finally knows the truth. They can rest now." The piano music continued wrapping around them like an embrace. Emma moved closer to her mother, and Kathleen put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, drawing strength from the contact. "What does this mean for us? What are we supposed to do with this information?" Margaret reached into her purse one more time, pulling out a business card. "I'm not just Caroline's descendant, Miss Sullivan. I'm also a lawyer specializing in historical property restoration, and I'd like to offer you a proposition." The card read, "Margaret Sinclair, attorney at law with offices in Pittsburgh, and a list of credentials suggesting she was very good at her job. I want to help you restore this hotel properly. I have access to Caroline's remaining estate, money that rightfully should have belonged to the Blackwoods and their descendants. I'd like to use it to fund your renovation to turn this place into the thriving business it was always meant to be." Emma stepped closer, still staring at the piano that continued to play its ghostly lullaby. "What's the catch?" Margaret smiled sadly. "No catch, just a request. When you reopen, I'd like you to dedicate a memorial to the Blackwood family. Let people know what really happened here so their story isn't forgotten again. And," she hesitated, then continued, "I'd like to help you give them a proper burial. If their deaths were murder, not suicide, they deserve to be laid to rest with dignity." Kathleen looked around the lobby, imagining it restored to its original glory. Guests checking in at the mahogany desk, families gathering around the fireplace in the dining room, children running up and down the grand staircase while their parents sip coffee and plan their day. The hotel alive again, but this time built on truth instead of lies. "There's one more thing," she said. "We need to involve the authorities. If Caroline's confession is authentic, this is evidence of a triple murder. The case may be over a century old, but the truth still matters." Margaret nodded. "I've already contacted a friend at the state police and the district attorney's office. They're willing to reopen the case based on Caroline's confession and the supporting evidence you found. The Blackwoods can finally be cleared of any wrongdoing." The piano music swelled, then gradually faded until only the normal creaks and sighs of an old building remained, as if the Blackwoods were finally saying goodbye. "But William isn't going to let this happen without a fight," Kathleen warned. "He made it very clear that he wants us gone." Margaret's expression, hardened family resemblance to William, suddenly more pronounced. "My nephew has spent his entire life trading on the Sinclair name. He's built his identity on being Mill Creek royalty. The truth would destroy everything he values. Anything he might try would only make him look guilty," Emma argued. "This isn't the 1890s anymore. He can't just murder us and get away with it." The three women fell silent, the weight of history pressing down on them. Outside storm clouds gathered on the horizon, casting the lobby into premature twilight. "You'd be surprised what people can get away with even now," Margaret finally said, "especially in small towns where they control the police, the courts, and the bank that holds everyone's mortgage. William won't come at you directly. There will be building code violations, problems with permits, contractors who suddenly can't fit you into their schedule, suppliers who can't deliver materials, death by 1,000 paper cuts." Mac, who had been silently observing from the shadows, stepped forward. "Then we'd better start building our army." The next morning, Kathleen awoke to the sound of trucks in the driveway. Peering out the window, she saw a half-dozen pickup trucks parked in front of the hotel and a group of men unloading tools and lumber. Max stood in the center giving directions like a general deploying troops. "Friends of mine," he explained when Kathleen ventured downstairs. "Former service buddies, a couple of guys I go fishing with. Mill Creek might be Sinclair territory, but not everyone bows to the king." By midday, the hotel hummed with activity. 2 electricians rewired the first floor, bringing the ancient system up to code. A plumber and his apprentice tackled the main water line, restoring running water for the first time in decades. 3 carpenters reinforced the sagging porch while others cleared debris and patched the leaking roof. Margaret arrived with lunch for everyone, enormous sandwiches from Ruby's Diner, and a stack of blueprints for the restoration. She'd also brought Henry Cooper, the former sheriff, a man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a deliberate way of speaking that suggested he measured each word before releasing it. "I've been waiting 30 years to take a run at the Sinclairs." Henry admitted, examining Carolyn's confession with a professional eye. Not that anyone would listen to me. Hard to convince folks their town patriarch is descended from a murderess without evidence. Emma, documenting their progress on her phone, looked up from her screen. Will people even care about something that happened over 100 years ago? Henry's weathered face creased in a humorless smile. In most places, maybe not. But Mill Creek isn't most places. This town has been dying for decades. The mill closed in the 80s. The timber industry collapsed in the 90s. The only thing keeping this place on the map is Sinclair money and Sinclair myth. William loves to talk about how his family built this town, how they've been its backbone for generations. What happens when people learn they built their fortune on blood money? The next day brought their first real opposition. A police cruiser pulled up outside, and Chief Monroe, young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with his assignment, informed them that anonymous complaints had been filed about safety violations and unauthorized construction work. Building permits take weeks to process, the chief explained, not meeting Kathleen's eyes. And there are concerns about historical preservation requirements. This building is over 100 years old. There are regulations. Henry stepped forward, his former authority evident in every line of his body. These are emergency repairs to prevent further damage, Tom. You know as well as I do that emergency work is exempt from permitting requirements. Unless the rules have changed since William Sinclair bought your department a new fleet of cruisers last year. The young chief flushed, caught between duty and politics. Just keep the noise down, all right, and file the proper paperwork. Soon. As the police car retreated, Max spat on the ground. Monroe's father was a good cop. That boy's just William's puppet with a badge. Henry nodded grimly. And that's just the opening move. William's testing the waters, seeing how much resistance we've got. It'll get worse. The prediction proved accurate sooner than any of them expected. The next morning, Kathleen received notice that her bank account had been frozen due to suspicious activity. The power company suddenly discovered that the hotel's electrical service had been improperly restored and shut it off, citing safety concerns. The local building supply store called to apologize. They couldn't fulfill Mac's lumber order after all. Inventory issues. We're at war, Henry observed, poring over town records Margaret had retrieved from the county archives. And William has all the heavy artillery, but we have the truth, Emma insisted, her teenage idealism undimmed by the setbacks. And Caroline's confession. That has to count for something. Kathleen wasn't so certain. In her experience, 15 years married to a powerful man who controlled the narrative. Truth was malleable, easily dismissed, or rewritten by those with enough money and influence. William could claim the confession was forged, could question the provenance of the financial records, could simply use his position to bury them in red tape until they ran out of resources and gave up. Unless we can find more evidence, she realized, something William can't dismiss or explain away. The search resumed with renewed urgency. While Mac's friends continued the essential repairs using supplies they'd already acquired, Kathleen, Emma and Margaret systematically combed through every inch of the hotel, searching for additional hiding places. More letters, anything that might strengthen their case. In the attic, buried under decades of dust and abandoned furniture, they found a steamer trunk with the initials EB, Elizabeth Blackwood. Inside were children's clothes carefully preserved and a photo album documenting Charlotte's brief life. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family picnics by the lake. A little girl growing up loved and cherished, only to have her life cut short by greed and desperation. What kind of monster could hurt a child? Emma whispered, tracing Charlotte's face in a fading photograph. How could anyone look at her and not see a human being? Margaret, sorting through the contents with gloved hands, paused. Carolyn wasn't a monster, not at first. Just a desperate woman who made one terrible choice, then another until there was no way back. I've spent my life trying to understand her, not to excuse what she did, but to make sure nothing like it ever happens again. The most significant discovery came 3 days later as they were examining the office behind the front desk. Emma noticed that the dimensions didn't match the blueprints. The room should have extended another 6 feet toward the back of the building. Careful inspection revealed a false wall, and behind it a small room that must have served as Jonathan Blackwood's private office. The space was undisturbed, as if it had been sealed immediately after Jonathan's death and forgotten. A roll-top desk dominated the center, its cubbies still stuffed with papers. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with ledgers and reference volumes. A leather armchair sat in one corner beside a small table that held a crystal decanter and glasses long empty, but still waiting for their owner's return. "It's all here," Margaret breathed, lifting a leather portfolio from the desk. The original town charter, land deeds, banking records, everything Jonathan was planning to present to the town council the day after he died. Kathleen felt a presence in the room, not threatening but watchful. The air seemed charged with anticipation, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath. "Here's our evidence, Emma. Everything we need to prove what really happened." The portfolio contained irrefutable documentation of Caroline's embezzlement, meticulous records showing exactly how she had skimmed funds from various town accounts over a period of years. But more significantly, it also held the original founding documents of Mill Creek, revealing a truth that had been buried for over a century. Jonathan Blackwood, not Caroline's husband, had been the primary founder and financial backer of the town. The Sinclairs didn't build Mill Creek. Margaret realized the color draining from her face as she examined a faded map with Jonathan's signature. They stole it. They stole it and then rewrote history to make themselves the heroes. Emma, capturing everything on her phone, looked up sharply. "That's why William is so desperate to shut us down. He's not just protecting his great-grandmother's reputation, he's protecting the foundation of his entire identity." The sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Upstairs, something heavy crashed to the floor. Then came the unmistakable smell of smoke. Mac appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Fire. Third floor. Someone threw something through the window of room 7A. They rushed upstairs to find flames already consuming the wallpaper, spreading quickly across the ancient dry wood. Mac and Henry organized a bucket brigade while Margaret called the fire department. Kathleen and Emma grabbed fire extinguishers from the renovation supplies, attacking the blaze from different angles. For 20 terrifying minutes, they fought to contain the fire hampered by low water pressure and the building's maze-like layout. The smoke grew thicker, making it difficult to breathe or see. Just when Kathleen thought they would lose the battle, sirens wailed in the distance. The Mill Creek Volunteer Fire Department arrived with surprising speed, their ancient truck groaning up the driveway. Chief Santiago, a compact woman with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too many tragedies, directed her crew with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the fire was under control, though the damage to the third floor was extensive. "Arson," the chief confirmed, examining the remains of a Molotov cocktail. "Cheap liquor bottle, gasoline rag, wick. Amateur hour but effective. Any idea who might want to burn you out?" Kathleen met Henry's eyes across the charred remnants of room 7A. They both knew, but there was no proof. Nothing that would stand up in court or even in the court of public opinion. Just suspicion and circumstantial evidence. "This is just the beginning," Henry warned as the fire trucks departed. William's sending a message. Next time he won't be so sloppy. That night, as Kathleen tried to sleep despite the lingering smell of smoke and the knowledge that someone had tried to destroy their home, Emma came to her room. She was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom, I saw something during the fire. There was a girl in a white dress standing in the hallway." She pointed at the wall between rooms 5B and 7A, where 6A is sealed up. "I think she was trying to tell me something." Kathleen sat up, suddenly alert. "What do you think she wanted?" I think there's something else hidden in room 6A. Something we missed." Together, they made their way to the third-floor flashlights, illuminating the smoke-damaged hallway. The sealed room had been spared from the fire, protected by the very walls that had hidden it for decades. Inside, everything remained as they had left it. The dusty furniture, the faded carpet, the writing on the mirror. Emma moved with purpose, as if guided by unseen hands. She knelt beside the bed, running her fingers along the baseboard. "There's something here," she insisted. "I can feel it." Kathleen joined her, tapping the wooden panels until she heard a hollow sound. Prying loose the baseboard revealed another hidden compartment. Smaller than the others, but large enough to hold a metal box similar to the one that had contained Caroline's confession. Inside was a second journal, the leather cover cracked with age. The handwriting was different from Jonathan's or Elizabeth's, spikier, more urgent. The first page bore a single name, Charlotte Blackwood. A 7-year-old keeping a journal. Kathleen wondered carefully, turning the brittle pages. Emma leaned closer. "Look at the dates. This starts just 2 weeks before they died. The entries were simple at first, written in the uneven hand of a child just learning to express herself on paper. Descriptions of daily activities, complaints about having to practice piano, excitement about an upcoming church picnic. But the final entries told a different story. August 30th, 1892. Mrs. Sinclair came to the hotel again today. She and Papa had a fight in his office. I'm not supposed to listen at doors, but I did anyway. She was crying and saying she would go to jail. Papa said she should have thought of that before she took the money. I don't understand grown-up problems. September 5th, 1892. Mama told me to be careful around Mrs. Sinclair. She said sometimes people who seem nice can do bad things when they're scared. I asked what Mrs. Sinclair is scared of, and Mama said the truth. I don't understand why the truth is scary. October 12th, 1892. The last entry. Mrs. Sinclair brought me a doll today. It's very pretty with a china face and real hair. She said it was because I'm such a good girl. But she looked sad when she gave it to me. When I showed Mama, she got very quiet and put the doll away in the attic. She said we need to be careful. Papa is sending me to stay with Aunt Jane and baby Sarah tomorrow. I don't want to go, but Mama says it's not safe here right now. I don't understand what's happening, but everyone seems scared. The final page contained a child's drawing, a family portrait. Mother, father, Charlotte herself, and a baby in a cradle. Beneath it in careful letters, my family forever. Emma's hands shook as she closed the journal. She knew. Charlotte knew something was wrong, and she was supposed to leave with Sarah the next day. If she had, she would have survived. Kathleen felt a deep, aching sorrow for this family destroyed by greed. For the little girl who had sensed danger but couldn't possibly understand it. For the parents trying desperately to protect their children. And somewhere in that sorrow, anger kindled. At Caroline Sinclair, yes, but also at her descendants who had perpetuated her lies for generations. At William Sinclair, who would rather burn down history than face the truth. We need to get these documents somewhere safe, she decided. William's already tried to destroy the hotel. These papers are our only leverage. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Both women froze, listening intently. The hotel was supposed to be empty except for them. Mac and Henry had gone home hours ago, and Margaret was staying at her house on the other side of town. Someone else was in the building. The floorboard creaked again, closer this time. Kathleen tucked Charlotte's journal into her shirt and pushed Emma toward the hole in the wall leading back to the hallway. The hotel's ancient ventilation system carried sounds in unpredictable ways. What seemed nearby could be floors away, and vice versa. Still, they couldn't take chances. In the dim glow of their flashlights, mother and daughter crept toward the stairs. Another creak, definitely on their floor. Kathleen pulled Emma into the shadow of a linen closet, holding her breath as a beam of light swept across the hallway. The intruder moved with purpose, checking each room methodically. His silhouette was unmistakable, tall and straight-backed, with the military posture of a man who believed the world should bend to his will. William Sinclair had decided to handle matters personally. Kathleen weighed their options. The main staircase would expose them immediately. The service stairs at the back were closer to William than to them. The window at the end of the hall opened onto a steep drop with no fire escape on this side of the building. A floorboard betrayed them. Emma shifted her weight, and the ancient wood protested with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent corridor. William's flashlight beam swung toward their hiding place. Gotcha, his voice cut through the darkness, satisfaction dripping from each syllable. He was blocking their only escape route. Kathleen's mind raced, cataloging potential weapons. Nothing. She pushed Emma behind her, preparing to charge William if necessary. At least he wouldn't hurt her daughter without going through her first. The temperature in the hallway plummeted suddenly, their breath visible in the flashlight beams. The hair on Kathleen's arms stood on end as electricity seemed to crackle in the air around them. William advanced, his expression coldly triumphant. Found something interesting in room 6A, did we? Something that doesn't belong to you. Before Kathleen could respond, all three flashlights flickered and died simultaneously, plunging the hallway into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was broken by a sound that froze Kathleen's blood, the soft laughter of a child echoing from everywhere and nowhere. What the hell? William's voice had lost its confidence, replaced by something close to panic. The scent of lavender perfume filled the air, accompanied by the faint notes of a lullaby. A door creaked open down the hallway, then slammed shut with unexpected force. The floorboards vibrated beneath their feet as if someone were running small, quick footsteps that seemed to circle William. William's harsh breathing betrayed his position. "Get away from me!" "Who's there?" A match flared in the darkness, illuminating nothing but William's terrified face as he tried to create light. The tiny flame caught something, a candle perhaps, and for a brief moment the hallway was bathed in a golden glow. Standing between William and the staircase was a little girl in a white nightgown, her dark hair in neat braids, her face solemn and pale. She said nothing, merely pointed one small finger at William, her expression containing more accusation than any words could convey. William's scream echoed through the hotel as he stumbled backward, dropping the candle. Darkness swallowed them again, broken only by the sound of his frantic footsteps as he fled blindly down the stairs. Emma's grip on her mother's arm was painful. "Did you see her? Did you see Charlotte?" Before Kathleen could answer, their flashlights flickered back to life, revealing an empty hallway. No sign of the ghostly child or the fleeing banker, remained only the lingering scent of lavender and a small, perfect handprint in the dust on the floor. They didn't sleep that night. By dawn, Mac had arrived with reinforcements, half a dozen men with shotguns and grim expressions. Henry brought news from town. William Sinclair had been seen driving erratically through Mill Creek at midnight, his Cadillac swerving dangerously before disappearing toward his estate on the hill overlooking town. Something scared him bad, Henry observed, examining the handprint in the dust that Emma had carefully preserved with a piece of clear tape. "You sure you didn't wallop him with something?" Kathleen and Emma exchanged glances, silently agreeing to keep the night's supernatural encounter to themselves. "We think he saw something that changed his perspective," was all Kathleen would say. Mac positioned his friends at strategic points around the hotel, establishing a security perimeter that would make any military commander proud. "These boys all served with me. They know how to handle themselves." The morning brought another surprise visitor, Frank Morgan, the real estate agent, who'd first warned Kathleen about the hotel. He shifted uncomfortably, holding a cardboard box that looked decades old. "I've been thinking about our conversation, Mrs. Sullivan, about why I called you before the auction closed." He set the box on the front desk, removing its dusty lid to reveal stacks of yellowed papers. "Williams had been paying me for years to steer people away from this place, to spread stories about it being unsalvageable. But there are some things even money can't buy." Frank pulled out a leather folder containing property deeds and land surveys dating back to the 1890s. Most importantly, the original town and corporation papers signed by Jonathan Blackwood as primary founder and financier. The Sinclairs didn't just steal this hotel, they stole the entire town's history. "Why are you showing us this now?" Kathleen asked, suspicion edging her voice. The old realtor looked toward the staircase where a thin shaft of sunlight illuminated the floating dust motes. "I've been selling real estate in Mill Creek for 40 years. Watched Williams systematically buy up every property worth having. Watched good people leave because they couldn't compete." He glanced at Kathleen. "Maybe it's time someone stood up to him. Maybe it's time this town had a second chance." By mid-morning, Chief Santiago from the fire department arrived, this time out of uniform and clearly off duty. "I ran the lab test myself," she announced without preamble. "The accelerant used in the fire matches a specific type of gasoline sold only at the Sinclair Marina on the lake, and I found this in the debris." She held up an evidence bag containing a monogrammed handkerchief, the elegant WS, still visible despite the soot stains. Williams had been wiping his fingerprints but forgot about his DNA. Careless. Henry's weathered face split in a grin. "Candace, you beautiful genius. You got enough for an arrest warrant." The fire chief's expression darkened. "The mayor's blocking it. Says there's not enough evidence for such serious allegations against a respected citizen. But I thought you should know. Some of us in this town still care about justice." The alliance against William Sinclair was growing, but so was his desperation. By mid-morning, the bank had called Kathleen's mortgage broker in Connecticut, pressuring them to demand immediate repayment of her home equity loan, the money she'd been counting on to fund the initial renovations. The local news website posted a thinly veiled hit piece questioning the financial stability and construction expertise of the hotel's new owner. The building inspector arrived with a list of violations so extensive it would take months and a fortune to address them all. "William's striking back hard," Henry warned as they gathered in the kitchen. "He's using every bit of his influence to shut us down." Margaret arrived with lunch and unexpected news. I've filed papers to have Caroline's confession and the financial records entered into the historical record at the county level. William can't bury this anymore. It's officially part of Mill Creek's documented history. She spread a large sheet of paper across the kitchen table, a family tree she had carefully constructed. This shows the exact connection between your family and the Blackwoods, Kathleen. Sarah Blackwood became Mary Morrison when her aunt adopted her after the murders. She married John Peterson in 1912. Their daughter Eleanor was your grandmother who married Thomas Sullivan. Your mother Catherine was their daughter, and then you. Emma traced the lines with her finger, marveling at the connection. So Charlotte would have been my great-great-great-aunt. No wonder we look so much alike. Margaret nodded, triumph and sadness mingling in her expression. 5 generations removed, but blood tells. The Blackwoods have been waiting for their family to return, to reclaim what was stolen. The battle lines were drawn. Margaret used her considerable legal skills to counter each bureaucratic attack, filing injunctions against the building inspector's report and leveraging her connections at the state level to protect Kathleen from William's financial warfare. Mack and his veterans maintained their protective watch over the hotel, while Emma took their story public, creating a social media account that quickly gained traction among history buffs and paranormal enthusiasts alike. Frank Morgan proved an unexpected ally, using his decades of connections in the real estate world to find contractors willing to work despite William's influence. The old realtor had documents on nearly every property transaction in Mill Creek for 40 years, evidence of William's systematic consolidation of power through questionable means. William's next move was more direct. 2 days after his midnight encounter with Charlotte's ghost, he called a town meeting at the Mill Creek Community Center. Standing before a crowd of curious townspeople, he presented himself as the wounded party, a civic leader being attacked by outsiders. These people have come to our town with wild accusations about one of Mill Creek's founding families. His voice resonated through the packed hall. They claim to have evidence, but all they've shown are some old papers that could have been fabricated by anyone. They're trying to profit from scandal and sensationalism at the expense of our town's reputation. Kathleen and her allies sat in the back, letting William dig himself deeper with each embellishment. When he finally paused for breath, Henry stood up, commanding attention through presence alone. I served this town as sheriff for 30 years. Henry's voice carried naturally, trained by decades of authority. In all that time, I never saw William Sinclair take an interest in Mill Creek's actual problems, the shuttered businesses, the young people leaving the opioid crisis claiming our neighbors. But now that his family's reputation is at stake, suddenly he's the town's greatest defender. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Henry wasn't finished. William talks about Mill Creek's reputation, but what's left of it? We used to be known for craftsmanship, for community spirit, for looking out for each other. Now we're just another dying town where one family owns everything and everyone else struggles to get by. William attempted to interrupt, but Frank Morgan rose slowly from his seat, his presence commanding immediate silence. For 40 years, I've sold what's left of this town's real estate, helped William acquire most of it. His voice cracked with emotion. I've watched Mill Creek die a slow death while the Sinclairs prospered. Maybe it's time we asked why. Margaret stepped forward, producing copies of the original town charter from her briefcase. These documents prove that Jonathan Blackwood, not Andrew Sinclair, was the primary founder of Mill Creek. The Blackwood family invested their fortune in building this town, establishing the original mill, constructing the first school, donating land for the church in town square. She paused, letting the revelation sink in. And for their generosity, they were murdered. Their legacy was stolen, their contributions erased from history, and their descendants, she gestured toward Kathleen and Emma, denied their rightful place in this community. The room erupted in chaos. Longtime residents who had grown up hearing the Sinclair version of history demanded explanations. Younger citizens, already skeptical of William's influence, seized on this confirmation of their suspicions. Through it all, William stood rigid, his face a mask of fury as decades of carefully cultivated mythology crumbled around him. Kathleen chose that moment to add the final piece. She stood holding Charlotte's journal for all to see. This belongs to Charlotte Blackwood, a 7-year-old girl who knew she was in danger but couldn't possibly understand why. She was supposed to leave town the day after she died to go stay with her aunt and baby sister. If Caroline Sinclair had waited just one more day, that little girl would have lived. The simple human tragedy cut through the political and historical arguments. Whatever loyalty the townspeople felt toward the Sinclair name couldn't withstand the image of a child's life needlessly cut short. William's carefully constructed defense collapsed under the weight of a little girl's journal. He stormed out of the meeting, ignoring questions shouted by neighbors he'd known all his life. From the community center's steps, Kathleen watched his Cadillac squeal away, bearing a man whose world was disintegrating beneath him. Tomorrow we file for historical recognition of the Blackwood family as Mill Creek's founders, Margaret announced, as they walked back to the hotel through the crisp autumn evening. William won't give up easily, but public opinion has shifted. He's vulnerable now. The restored chandelier cast rainbow prisms across the lobby as they entered, giving the old hotel a festive air, despite the ongoing renovations. Mac's veterans had made remarkable progress during the town meeting, completing essential electrical work and beginning repairs on the fire-damaged third floor. For the first time since they had arrived in Mill Creek, Kathleen allowed herself to feel genuine hope. The hotel's secrets were emerging from darkness. The truth about the Blackwoods was being restored to public memory. And her own connection to this place, this legacy she'd stumbled into, was becoming clearer with each passing day. That night, as she drifted towards sleep, she felt a gentle touch on her forehead, like a parent checking on a sleeping child. The scent of lavender filled the room briefly, then faded. Kathleen smiled into the darkness, no longer afraid of the hotel's permanent residents. She dreamed of the Blackwoods, not as they died, but as they had lived. Jonathan in his office, carefully maintaining his ledgers. Elizabeth at the piano teaching Charlotte a simple melody. A family building something meant to last, creating a legacy of substance rather than mere wealth. In her dream, they welcomed her, embracing her as the daughter of their surviving child, accepting Emma as Charlotte's spiritual twin across time. The dream shattered at dawn with the sound of breaking glass. Kathleen bolted upright as shouts and the unmistakable crack of gunfire erupted from downstairs. The lobby was chaos. Two of Mac's veterans were restraining a wild-eyed Pete Davis William Sinclair's handyman and suspected arsonist, who had apparently tried to force his way into the hotel with a shotgun. Mac himself was nursing a bloody arm where flying glass had caught him, while Henry secured Davis's weapon. Bastard came in, shooting, Mac growled, allowing Emma to wrap a clean towel around his injury. Said William paid him $5,000 to burn the place down tonight, with us in it. Davis slumped in his captor's grip, already regretting his confession. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Just a quick fire insurance would cover it. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. Emma, who had been documenting every development on her phone, made sure to record his words. This going on social media, Davis asked, suddenly aware of the camera. And to the state police, Emma confirmed her expression hard. William just escalated from property damage to attempted murder. Chief Monroe arrived with backup, looking deeply uncomfortable as Henry presented Davis and the evidence of his attempted arson. The young chief couldn't ignore an armed attack witnessed by half a dozen people, including a former sheriff. He placed Davis under arrest, his movements mechanical, his expressions suggesting he was already dreading William Sinclair's reaction. The attack galvanized the town. News spread quickly through Willow Creek's gossip network, and by noon a steady stream of visitors arrived at the hotel, some offering help with repairs, others bringing food, many simply curious to see the place that had become the center of the community's biggest scandal in living memory. Ruby from the diner brought her entire staff to serve lunch to the volunteer workers. The local lumberyard delivered materials that had mysteriously been out of stock just days earlier. Even the building inspector returned significantly, revising his list of violations downward and offering advice on cost-effective solutions for those that remained. The tide has turned, Margaret observed, watching the impromptu community restoration effort with satisfaction. William overplayed his hand. People might tolerate corruption and historical revisionism, but attempted murder crosses a line even in Mill Creek. By nightfall, the hotel hummed with activity and conversation. The dining room hosted an impromptu potluck dinner where Mac's veterans mingled with curious locals, swapping stories and theories about the Blackwood-Sinclair feud. The lobby became an informal museum as Margaret displayed the historical documents they discovered, explaining their significance to attentive townspeople who were reevaluating everything they thought they knew about their community's origins. In the midst of this unexpected gathering, Kathleen found herself pulled aside by an elderly woman she didn't recognize. Helen Whitaker, the woman introduced herself, her rheumy eyes bright with excitement. I used to clean for Margaret's grandmother, the old Mrs. Sinclair back in the 60s. She talked sometimes when she'd had her sherry, talked about this place, about the Blackwoods, said they were watching her. Kathleen felt a familiar chill, not of fear but recognition. What else did she say? Said she could hear them at night. The little girl especially running up and down the halls laughing. Said sometimes she'd find toys moved around or her jewelry rearranged. Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. The night before she died, she told me she saw them all standing at the foot of her bed, said they were waiting for her on the other side. She was terrified. The old woman squeezed Kathleen's hand. I never believed in ghosts before that. But the look in her eyes, that wasn't dementia or imagination. That was pure fear, the fear of someone facing judgment. After Helen shuffled away, Emma appeared at her mother's side. People keep telling me stories about this place, about seeing Charlotte in windows or hearing piano music when the building was empty. They've been seeing the Blackwoods for generations, but everyone was too afraid of the Sinclairs to talk about it openly. The sound of screeching tires outside cut through the dinner conversation. Raised voices followed, then a crash as the front door was thrown open with enough force to crack the ancient wood. William Sinclair stood in the doorway, disheveled and wild-eyed, a stark contrast to his usual immaculate appearance. Behind him, the red and blue lights of police cruisers bathed the street in emergency colors. This ends now, he snarled, scanning the room until his gaze locked on Kathleen. You've turned my town against me. Dragged my family name through the mud. All for what money, attention. Mac and his veterans formed a protective barrier between William and the rest of the room. Whatever you're doing, son, you need to walk back out that door and do it sober. William ignored him, his focus laser tight on Kathleen. You think you're so righteous. The descendant of the sainted Blackwoods, back to claim her birthright. His laughter held no humor, only bitterness. You're nothing, a nobody who got lucky at an auction. This town was built by Sinclairs, maintained by Sinclairs. We earned our place here through generations of hard work. Henry stepped forward, his voice deliberately calm. Your great-grandmother built her fortune on stolen money and murder, William. Whatever came after was tainted from the start. William's hand emerged from his pocket, gripping a small revolver, an antique by the look of it, possibly a family heirloom. The room froze. Police sirens wailed outside, but the officers hadn't entered yet, perhaps hesitant to confront the town's most powerful citizen. My family made Mill Creek what it is, William insisted, waving the gun erratically. Everything worth having in this town exists because of us. The Blackwoods were failures. They would have run this place into the ground if they'd lived. Behind William, Chief Monroe finally appeared in the doorway, his own weapon drawn, but his expression uncertain. Mr. Sinclair, please put down the gun. We can talk about this. William paid no attention. His world narrowed to his grievances. He advanced into the room, forcing Mac and his protective line to back up. I'm not going to let you destroy 130 years of my family's legacy. This hotel should have been demolished decades ago, along with every trace of the Blackwoods. He raised the revolver, its barrel wavering between Kathleen and Emma. The building's going down tonight, and you're going down with it. The crystal chandelier that Mac had repaired that morning began to sway gently, though there was no breeze. The temperature in the room plummeted, a sharp contrast to the warmth of so many bodies gathered in the old space. Several people gasped as their breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. Across the lobby, the player piano's keys depressed of their own accord, picking out the first few notes of a lullaby that echoed eerily in the sudden silence. The sheet music on top of the instrument fluttered as if turned by invisible hands. William faltered, his gun hand trembling as he looked wildly around the room. What's happening? What are you doing? A small porcelain doll that had been part of Margaret's display of Blackwood artifacts suddenly toppled from its stand, rolling across the floor to stop at William's feet. Its glass eyes seemed to stare up at him accusingly. What happened next would be described differently by different witnesses. Some would say the ancient chandelier chose that precise moment to break loose from its mounting, crashing down just inches from William. Others would claim that an unseen force pushed him off balance. A few would insist they saw a small figure in white dart between his legs. Whatever the cause, William staggered the gun, discharging into the ceiling as he lost his footing. His arms windmilled as he tried to regain his balance, sending the revolver clattering across the floor. He fell hard, his head striking the edge of the reception desk with a sickening crack. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Chief Monroe secured the gun, while one of Mac's friends, who had medical training, checked William's vital signs. An ambulance was called. Statements were taken. Through it all, Kathleen held Emma close, both of them shaken by their narrow escape. Later, as William was carried out on a stretcher unconscious but alive, Kathleen noticed something strange. A small handprint in the dust on the floor, as if a child had pressed their palm down while kneeling beside the fallen banker. By the time she thought to point it out to Emma, housekeeping volunteers had already swept the area clean. The headlines in the regional papers the next morning were sensational. Banking scion attempts armed assault in historic hotel. Mill Creek's darkest secret exposed. Century-old murder case reopened. News vans from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia clogged Main Street as reporters competed for the most dramatic angle on the story. William Sinclair had suffered a serious concussion and remained hospitalized under police guard, charged with attempted murder, illegal discharge of a firearm, and a host of lesser offenses. Pete Davis had already agreed to testify against him in exchange for leniency. The bank's board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss leadership transition. The mayor had issued a formal apology to Kathleen and announced plans for a historical commission to accurately document Mill Creek's origins. The sudden attention brought unexpected benefits. A historical preservation society offered a substantial grant for the hotel's restoration. A reality TV show about paranormal investigations requested permission to film an episode on the premises. Tourists began appearing eager to see the site of Mill Creek's famous ghost story. Margaret arrived with the state police and representatives from the district attorney's office, who took formal possession of Caroline's confession and the supporting evidence. After 130 years, the Blackwood family murders were officially under investigation as a homicide case. "We can't prosecute Caroline," obviously the lead detective explained, "but we can set the historical record straight, give the victims the justice of truth at least." The restoration of the Haunted Glen Hotel began in earnest with a carefully phased approach that reflected both budget constraints and respect for the building's history. Margaret's restitution money funded the critical structural repairs. Frank Morgan, eager to make amends for his role in William's schemes, connected Kathleen with preservationists who specialized in Victorian-era restorations. Max supervised the work, training a team of local carpenters in traditional techniques that had nearly been lost to time. "We're preserving more than just a building," he explained to a group of young apprentices as they carefully restored the intricate woodwork in the main staircase. "We're keeping alive the skills that built it, the craftsmanship that made Mill Creek special." 3 months after William's arrest, they completed the first phase of restoration, the lobby dining room, and 4 guest rooms fully renovated to their original splendor. A small ceremony marked the occasion, with Margaret cutting a ribbon across the front entrance. Though the hotel wasn't fully operational yet, weekend tours became a regular feature, drawing history enthusiasts from surrounding counties. The Mill Creek Revitalization Committee, formed in the wake of William's downfall, began developing a master plan to rebuild the town's economy around its historical significance and natural beauty. The abandoned mill that had once been the town's economic engine was designated for renovation as an artisan marketplace. The empty storefronts on Main Street began to fill with specialty shops catering to the growing tourist traffic. Rose Jenkins, whose grandfather had owned the town's furniture factory before William forced him out of business, reopened in a small workshop behind the hotel. "I never thought I'd have the chance to use these," she said, showing Kathleen her grandfather's tools preserved for decades in her attic. "Now I'm teaching my grandson the same techniques." 6 months into the restoration, an unexpected development accelerated their progress. William Sinclair, facing multiple criminal charges and civil lawsuits, agreed to a plea deal that included substantial restitution. As part of the settlement, ownership of several key properties in Mill Creek was transferred to a community development trust, with Margaret as its legal advisor and Kathleen on the board of directors. "We're not just restoring a hotel or even a town," Margaret observed as they reviewed architectural plans in the dining room one evening. "We're restoring justice, rebalancing scales that have been tipped for over a century." 3 weeks later, the town gathered in Mill Creek Cemetery for a solemn ceremony. The Blackwoods' remains had been exhumed from the suicide section, an unconsecrated corner where they'd rested in ignominy for generations, and were being reinterred in a place of honor near the cemetery's central monument. New headstones commissioned by Margaret told the truth at last. Jonathan Elizabeth and Charlotte Blackwood, beloved family founders of Mill Creek, victims of violence, finally at rest. A smaller marker beside them acknowledged baby Sarah, who had escaped her family's fate only to live her life unaware of her true heritage. As the minister concluded the service, Kathleen noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. The autumn air, which had been still and heavy with approaching rain, suddenly stirred with a breeze that carried the scent of lavender. Beside her, Emma drew in a sharp breath. "Look," she whispered, pointing toward the cemetery gate. Three figures stood there transparent in the afternoon sunlight. A tall man in Victorian attire, a woman in a high-necked dress, a little girl with dark braids. They made no move to approach, merely watched as their earthly remains were finally given proper respect. As the last prayer was spoken, the man nodded once solemnly. The woman placed her hand on the child's shoulder. Then between one breath and the next, they faded from view. Kathleen glanced around to see if others had noticed. Most continued with the service, oblivious. But Margaret was staring at the now empty gate, tears streaming down her face. Max stood rigid, his hand frozen in what almost looked like a salute. Frank Morgan removed his hat, his weathered face solemn with recognition. And Henry nodded slightly, as if confirming something he had suspected all along. The following year unfolded with a rhythm of steady progress and unexpected challenges. Winter slowed the exterior renovations but allowed for focused work on the interior spaces. Spring brought a surge of volunteers and renewed energy. By summer, 14 of the 24 rooms were fully restored and operational, allowing the hotel to begin accepting overnight guests while work continued on the remaining areas. Each room told a story. Room 1A featured artifacts from Jonathan's business career. Room 2B showcased Elizabeth's musical interests, centered around the antique piano they discovered in the attic. Room 3C became known as the Charlotte Room, decorated with period toys and children's books from the 1890s. And Room 6A, by unanimous decision, had been converted into a dual-purpose space, a small museum displaying the letters and photographs that had revealed the truth, but also a working guest room beautifully appointed with period furniture and modern comforts. Despite, or perhaps because of its history, it quickly became the hotel's most requested accommodation, booked months in advance by guests ranging from paranormal enthusiasts to history buffs to those simply drawn to its story of justice, long delayed but finally served. Emma, now 16, and the hotel's unofficial social media manager, had become something of a celebrity in certain online communities. Her documentation of the Blackwood Sinclair saga had gone viral, attracting a following that translated into actual bookings. "We're already booked solid through Christmas," she announced one October evening, adjusting the lighting for a photo of the restored main staircase. "Apparently people love a good ghost story with a happy ending. Though I don't think we should mention that the ghosts are actually our ancestors. That might be too weird, even for ghost hunters." "Is it a happy ending?" Kathleen asked, watching a family with young children head up the staircase to their room. The parents looked tired, but excited, and their little girl was chattering about wanting to see the tower room where Charlotte Blackwood used to play. Emma considered the question, lowering her camera. "I think so. The Blackwoods got justice. We got a home and a business. The town's coming back to life, and Margaret found a way to make amends for her ancestors' crimes. Plus, we haven't heard any mysterious footsteps since the reburial ceremony." Kathleen smiled. It was true. The hotel felt different now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been when they'd first arrived. The awareness was still there, but it felt benevolent, protective, rather than haunting. Guests often commented on the warmth and comfort of the place, the sense that they were being cared for by someone who truly wanted them to feel at home. The business was thriving beyond Kathleen's wildest dreams. They were booked months in advance, with guests returning year after year and recommending the hotel to their friends and family. The town of Mill Creek had begun to recover as well, with new businesses opening to serve the tourists who came to visit the haunted hotel with a heart, as one travel blogger had dubbed it. Mac had become a permanent fixture, moving his workshop into a renovated carriage house behind the hotel and supervising the ongoing maintenance with the dedication of a man who had found a second career. Henry, semi-retired from his security consulting business, served as the hotel's historian, giving weekly lectures that drew crowds from surrounding counties. Frank Morgan, in an unexpected twist, had converted his real estate office into a heritage tourism center, connecting visitors with local history and attractions. William Sinclair had avoided prison through an insanity plea, but his influence in Mill Creek was broken. The bank had been sold to a regional chain. His property holdings were being liquidated to pay legal settlements. The few loyal family retainers who had initially stood by him had drifted away as his resources dwindled. Margaret had emerged as an unlikely town leader, using her legal expertise and financial resources to establish development initiatives aimed at revitalizing Mill Creek's economy. Under her guidance, the town was beginning to reclaim its original character as a place of craftsmanship and community, the vision Jonathan Blackwood had held over a century earlier. Robert Meacham, a furniture maker whose family had left Mill Creek in the 1950s, when William's father squeezed out competing businesses, returned to reopen his grandfather's workshop. The mill that William had closed in the 1980s was being renovated as an artisan cooperative, creating opportunities for traditional craftspeople to share skills and resources. This was always Jonathan's vision for Mill Creek. Margaret explained during one of the historical tours, not just a place to make money, but a community where craftsmanship was valued, where people took pride in creating things built to last. That night, as Kathleen was doing her final walkthrough before bed, a ritual she'd maintained since their first night in the hotel, she stopped in front of room 6A. The museum portion was popular with guests who came to read the letters and learn about the hotel's history. But tonight, something was different. On the glass case containing Charlotte's journal, someone had written a message in what looked like soap, just like the message they'd found on the mirror all those months ago. But this message was different. "Thank you for bringing us home." Kathleen smiled, running her fingers over the words. "Thank you for waiting for us," she whispered to the empty room. As she turned to leave, she could have sworn she heard a child's voice, faint but clear. "Mama, we can rest now. Our family came back." The room's temperature shifted not with the bone-deep chill of earlier encounters, but with a gentle warmth like stepping into sunlight. For a moment, the scent of lavender mingled with fresh-baked bread and the faint notes of a piano melody, homely smells and sounds that spoke of family and belonging. Kathleen made her way to the garden behind the hotel, where spring tulips were beginning to emerge from soil that had lain dormant for decades. The moonlight cast long shadows across newly laid pathways and freshly turned earth, where they planned to plant herbs and vegetables for the hotel kitchen. Mac found her there, contemplating the century-old oak tree that dominated the space. He stood beside her without speaking for a moment, both of them watching the branches sway gently in the night breeze. "Did I ever tell you why I decided to help that first day?" His voice was gruff with unspoken emotion. "Wasn't just neighborly kindness. When you opened that door for a second, just a split second, I could have sworn I saw someone standing behind you. A man in old-fashioned clothes watching you like he was making sure you were going to be all right. I figured anyone with that kind of guardian angel might be worth helping." Kathleen leaned against his shoulder, their relationship having evolved naturally from friendship to something deeper over the months of shared purpose. "I think they chose us, Mac, me and Emma. They knew we needed this place as much as it needed us." The breeze rustled through the oak's branches, sounding almost like applause, or perhaps like the laughter of a child finally free to play without fear. Either way, it was the sound of history healing itself of a wrong, made right of a family across time and beyond death finally coming home. In the guest book by the front desk, Kathleen had written a simple message for visitors: "Welcome to the Haunted Glen Hotel, where every room has a story, and every story deserves to be told." The truth, as Jonathan Blackwood had promised in his final letter, had indeed set them all free.